Hey everyone, Andrew here. I've had a few people ask how you might run scheduled Laravel tasks using Docker, so I thought I'd put together this video demonstrating 3 ways that you can accomplish that. Just as a quick note, the methods that I show should work for both production and development environments. So with that being said, let's get started. What you're seeing here is a basic local Docker development environment that I use for my Laravel apps. I've linked the repo that I use and have been building on in the description if you'd like to check that out. Essentially what we have here is a variety of services that our app uses. We have one for Nginx called Site, and it relies on our PHP and MySQL services. There's also 3 more for Composer, NPM, and Artisan. Let's talk about our Laravel app. I've already scaffolded out a super basic application consisting of a single model, price. You can see in the migration for the prices table that I'm just storing 2 values, a decimal for USD and euros. These correlate to the current price of Bitcoin. The route's web file contains a single route, the landing page, and it calls the price controller's index method, which that method just paginates the latest 50 price model objects and returns a prices index view. Equally as simplistic as the rest of the app, this view is just a bootstrap table displaying a list of the Bitcoin prices gathered by our controller. All of this was created so that I could showcase a custom Artisan command. If we check out the console commands directory, I've created a single command class, getPrice. Opening it up, you can see that we have our actual command, price:get, and under the handle method, I'm just calling this public CoinDesk API endpoint to get the latest exchange rates price of Bitcoin. The prices in USD and euros are being temporarily stored in an array before being used to create a new price object. Finally, some helpful information is returned back to the user's console. Let's see what this all looks like working together. First, we'll bring up the Docker environment by going to our console and using the docker compose up command with the D and build flags for detached mode, and asking Docker to build from our Docker files respectively. I'm also specifying the site service, which will just bring up Nginx, PHP, and MySQL, since we won't need the other 3 services at startup. Once those are up and running, we need to get our database structure added. Using our Artisan service, this is easy. Just run docker compose run rm, which destroys the container after it's finished, artisan migrate. Okay, I think we're done. Let's take a look at our site. Looks good, except the table's blank right now, but that's expected. We don't have any data in our database. We can change that though. Let's use the custom artisan command to get the latest Bitcoin price and save it to our database. Docker compose run rm artisan price get. And refresh our site. Perfect. We have our price displaying in our table as we expected. Now, this command seems like something that would be perfect for a regular cron job. We'd want it to run on a fairly frequent basis and update our database with the latest price returned. That's where Laravel Scheduling comes in. Heading over to their docs, it's super easy to get started. We need a cron that runs each minute calling Artisan's schedule run command. And then we just need to define what commands we want to schedule at what time. Let's head back into our app and open up that kernel class file. In the schedule method, we'll remove the default commented outline and put our own in there. Since we're calling an artisan command, schedule command, then our price get command, and finally, how often we want it to run. For this example, let's do every 2 minutes. Alright, that's all we have to do. Well, almost all we have to do. We still need a cron to run the artisan schedule run command every minute. So here's where our first method comes into play. This is arguably the easiest way and the most recommended that I've come across. We're simply going to use the local cron tab of the machine that's currently running our Docker setup. In this case, that's my MacBook, but it could be a Linux server or a desktop. If I run cron tab e locally, it opens up this blank file in Vim. It's blank since I don't have anything scheduled by cron locally. Let's actually expand this view a little bit so I have a little more room. And time to start working on the cron job line. First, I'm adding this path line in here so I don't have to use absolute values for the commands that are going to follow. Next, our actual cron. Following a similar structure to the one in the Laravel docs, every minute we're going to cd into the project directory. Then, instead of running PHP Artisan, we're going to use the Artisan Docker service. Docker compose run rm artisan schedule run. And using the same method as the docs, passing our console output and error output to dev null. Let's save this and exit our terminal editor. I'm going to open it up again real quick just to make sure that our change is saved. Okay, that looks good. Now it's just time to wait. Alright, it's been about 7 minutes. Let's refresh our site. We have 3 new entries, all made 2 minutes apart. It looks like our cron is working. Alright, so that looks great. But what if we don't want to use a local cron tab? Let's move on to our next method, but first let's bring down our development environment using Docker compose down. Uh-oh, I'll have to remove this cron first. Actually, I'll just use cron tab R and get rid of the whole thing. Okay, site's down, good. This next method is going to utilize one of our Docker containers, the PHP one to be precise. We are building that off of this PHP Docker file, and if we open that up, we can see that the image we're using is based off of Alpine Linux. This is great because that OS has a cron system already installed and in place. All we have to do is utilize it. Well, how are we going to write a cron to the cron tab on the container? Which, by the way, resides at etc cron tabs root. We could SSH into the container after it's initialized and manually edit it, but that's not great if you spin up or down this Docker network pretty frequently. Instead, we can create a separate file that holds our cron job and copy it over at build time. Let's get started with that. First, create our file that will hold our cron jobs. I'll just call it cron tab. And in here, we'll add in our Laravel Scheduler cron. Every minute, cd into the project root directory, which in our environment is set to var www.html, then run php artisan schedule run, which we can do since this container is running PHP and has everything installed for using Artisan. And just like before, outputting everything to dev null. All that's left to do is add a line into our PHP Docker file. Copy, which moves one file locally into our container, cron tab, to etc cron tabs root. Let's bring everything up again using Docker compose upd build site. Once that's finished, we can actually scroll up and see that during the PHP build, our cron tab file was copied over successfully. And we can even verify that further by using Docker compose exec on the PHP container and running cat on etc cron tabs root. There's our cron job. Let's run artisan migrate again to get our database structure up. And we'll open up our site and wait to see what happens. Okay, another 7 minutes have passed and nothing. There's no data added in. Well, let's take a look at the processes that are running in our PHP container by using docker compose exec php ps aux. There's only a handful in here running, and they're all associated with PHP. No data is being added because the cron process isn't running. Fortunately though for us, it's super easy to get it started up. Using docker compose exec, we'll add on the d flag, which just like the up command means that this will run detached and in the background. Then specify our PHP service, the cron d process, and the f flag, which runs cron d in the foreground. The reason we're doing this kind of weird combination between running exec in the background and cron d in the foreground is that it allows the cron process to continue running in our container while also freeing up our terminal. Now if we run ps aux again on the PHP container, we can see our cron service running successfully. Let's wait some more and see what happens. Alright, another 7 minutes have passed. Let's refresh our site. Perfect! We have 3 data points, pulled in 2 minutes apart, exactly what we expected. If we wanted to bring down the cron, it's not that difficult. First, we'll get the process list just like we did previously, and then just run docker compose exec on the PHP container, kill, and the process number. Now our crons aren't running anymore. And we could start them back up if we wanted to. But that's not what we're going to do right now. Instead, let's try out a third and final way of getting scheduled Laravel tasks running with Docker. First things first, let's bring down our local environment again using docker compose down. Once that's done, if we head into our dockercompose.yml file, we're going to be building a whole new service. Under our Artisan container, let's specify one called Cron. Just like our PHP and Artisan containers, this one will be built from a local Docker file. Specify the container name as Cron, the volumes as the same as our PHP and Artisan containers, and attach our Laravel network to it. Next, we need to create the Docker file that will build this container. Just like PHP and Artisan, this service is built with PHP, FPM, Alpine. And just like the PHP Docker file, we'll install PDO and PDO MySQL since we're running Artisan commands on it. We're copying over our cron tab just like we did in the PHP Docker file. And then finally, we're adding in a cmd keyword, followed by an array containing cron_d and -f. This cmd call tells Docker, this is the command that I want you to run once the container has been set up and initialized. Normally, this would be controlled by the Docker image the container is being built from, so that would be PHP running instead. However, we're hijacking this and using it to start up cron_d after initialization, instead of having to manually start it through docker compose exec. Alright, time to see how this works. Docker compose up d build site again, and we'll wait for Nginx, PHP, and MySQL to boot up. Then run our migrations through Docker again. And now, if we want to start our crons, we just use docker compose up d cron. If we run docker compose ps, we can see the cron service running in the background just as expected. Let's load up our site again and wait to see what happens. It's been 7 minutes, so let's refresh. Perfect! Just as expected, we're treated to 3 data points again, spaced out 2 minutes apart. Stopping our crons is even easier now. We just run docker compose stop cron. Now what if we brought up the cron service again, but excluded the D flag? This means that the output of the container will be piped directly to our terminal, and our terminal will be perpetually open until we hit Ctrl-C. The problem with this is that we're seeing output from the cron D process, the commands we've told it to run. It would be way more helpful if we saw the output from the actual Artisan schedule run command. Enabling that is actually really easy. Let's open up our cron tab file and change out this dev null to dev stdout. This way, any output from the schedule run command will be piped through to the console output. If we bring back up the cron service, using the build flag to bring in our new changes, we can immediately see that we're getting back a different output. This is what's returned back from the Artisan schedule run command. And if we speed things up a little, we'll eventually see it running the price get command as scheduled. Refreshing our browser after that, a new line of data was added. And that's about it for this video. You've learned 3 different ways to run scheduled Laravel tasks with Docker, using a local systems cron tab, running the scheduled cron inside an existing PHP container, and creating a specialized container separately just for the schedule run cron. Personally, I like the first method, as it allows multiple Artisan containers to be spun up each time the scheduler is ran, allowing jobs to be handled that might overlap or take longer to complete than anticipated. Huge thanks to my GitHub sponsors and everybody else who continues to support these videos. As always, if you have any questions about this or any other web development topics, please feel free to reach out to me in the comments or on my Twitter linked below. Thanks for watching.